What's up guys, welcome to another week's episode of GetPsyched, and today we're doing a little video for the psychology students and psychology graduates out there. Now this came off the back of a blog post that I wrote on GetPsyched, on the GetPsyched website a couple of months ago now. That got a lot of traction. I reshared it and it got a lot of attention, a lot of interaction as well. I've had a lot of direct messages about how to get an assistant psychology job. So on today's episode of GetPsyched, we're going to be looking at that topic. My top tips on how to get your first assistant psychology position. So a little bit of background to me and actually working as an assistant psychologist. In about 2015, 2016, I got a job as an assistant psychologist right before I started the doctorate in counselling psychology. Now, an assistant psychology position, you're basically the kind of assistant, or you're shadowing a clinical psychologist, primarily a clinical psychologist in learning disability services, brain injury services, supportive services, many different areas assistant psychologists are utilised in. And your position is basically to help with rehabilitation or help with treatment of the people that are using that service. So for me, I worked at a brain injury rehabilitation centre and I shadowed a couple of clinical psychologists. Me and a couple of other assistant psychologists had a caseload where I worked with the rehabilitation patterns that were utilised for those clients. So the clinical psychologist would conduct certain psychometrics and certain assessment procedures to establish the needs of those clients. And then it was my job, along with other services and a multidisciplinary team, including clinical psychologists and other counsellors, to actually enact that rehabilitation treatment. So that would take a number of months. You know, some people would be in those services for almost up to a year, even more. And my job was basically to build a relationship with them and help them on their treatment path. So that's enough about me. What are the things that I learned and the things that you need to do in order to get that first assistant psychology position? Because these things can be super competitive. And if you're looking at a clinical psychology doctorate, an assistant psychology job or more than one is probably definitely necessary in order for you to actually get on that doctorate. It's also super helpful if you're looking to do a counselling psychology doctorate, although it's not necessarily vital. It's becoming more and more vital for clinical psychology doctoral applications. So you definitely want to be thinking about this assistant psychology job if you're thinking of clinical psychology in particular, or counselling psychology also. The first thing is that you have to do is you have to set a foundation. And what I mean by that is you have to start a little bit of a process of, obviously your qualification, you're going to need that undergraduate in psychology. And you're also going to have to start building a level of experience. Now, when I say building that foundation, yes, it's okay to get that qualification, get that psychology undergraduate, and then build some experience. But in all honesty, you probably want to be doing both at the same time. So alongside your undergrad, you maybe want to be volunteering or working in like a healthcare profession, a support service, like as a support worker, maybe even like in a research position or working on a telephone helpline. Anything that gets you exposure and experience in actually working and assisting other people. If you can do that alongside your degree, then you're definitely off to a winner. You have to be able to think a little bit about these things in conjunction with each other, okay? Starting the foundation of that experience in helping professions and also building towards getting your degree in psychology. My next key point is to establish what you want. Now, assistant psychology positions are incredibly competitive, and when I got mine, there was people flying over from Ireland, there was people coming up from England up to Glasgow to try and get this job, so it was highly competitive. What you have to do in order to exploit or dominate when those jobs become available is establish your niche. So if you're a clinical psychology wannabe, if you're wanting to go into a clinical psychology doctorate and you're thinking, do you know what, working in mental health might be exactly what I want to do, start gaining some experience in working in mental health. If you're thinking about working in brain injury, start gaining experience in brain injury. Start reaching out and networking to different individuals and organisations that are within that field. Develop your niche, and then when those positions come up, you can say, well, hold on, I've got the exact experience needed for this position. You know, I've been working as a support worker for those suffering from brain injuries now for the past 2 years as I've been doing my psychology undergraduate. You really have to niche down as much as you can. Think about the area where you want to work, niche down on it and gain some experience. If you're unsure, you know, maybe you're going into clinical or counselling psychology and you say to yourself, do you know what, all the assistant psychology positions are to do with brain injury and I'm not really sure about brain injury. It could be a good idea to actually just get some experience there anyway. Think about the area that you live in. Are there a lot of mental health services? Are there a lot of people that are hiring assistant psychologists in learning difficulties and brain injury? I'm just using those as examples. You have to think about what's going on in your area. Do some research now. Think about who are the people that are actually hiring these assistant psychologists, and then think about what they're wanting and start developing your experience that way early on. And this kind of goes into my next point about doing your research. Look at the organizations that hire assistant psychologists. We've already covered that. But look at those industries in themselves. Look at those organizations. You know, for me, it was the Brain Injury Rehabilitation Trust here in Glasgow that hire a lot of assistant psychologists. So I did a huge amount of research on that organization, understood their mission, their ethos, the kind of people that they hire, what they're trying to do, how they're trying to help people. If you can understand that, you're developing your research, you're developing your understanding of the people that might actually hire assistant psychologists. Another thing I did was I actually contacted people who were either currently assistant psychologists or had had positions in my local area, so in the Glasgow area. I looked at people, I kind of reached out to them, said, you know, where did you work? What expertise did you have? What were the people that hired you looking for? These are all the kind of things that you got to do. You got to set that foundation of research, network, and then you can start to understand a little bit about how you can niche down. The next thing I'm going to talk about is actually building your experience from that foundation. So during your undergrad, you want to be thinking a little bit about developing experience, and then you want to build on that. So if you've been working as a volunteer helpline counsellor with Childline, that may be a great starting point. But then you can start to look at, well, do you know, I'm quite interested in working with young people. You can start building your experience in that industry. Or do you know what, working with young people isn't exactly for me. You might want to work in adult mental health, developing your experience working as a support worker for adults with learning difficulties or something like that. Building your experience step by step. Because one of the things that does happen is people do a really good job of building their experience on a foundational level and then they stay there. You want to start building, you want to gain more expertise, get yourself in better positions to gain more experience for when those jobs become available, you're ready to dominate. My next point is about reaching out and networking. Now, I'm a massive advocate of networking, and I really think in psychology we don't do enough of it, particularly psychology undergraduates. We don't think that networking is part of our profession or is a thing that we should be doing. But in all honesty, networking is one of the things that gave me the most opportunities in my psychology career. It didn't really have much to do with my experience or my qualifications in comparison to networking. Reaching out to individuals who are willing to listen, who are willing to give you advice, can be such a powerful, powerful thing. Getting your name known in the psychology field as someone with enthusiasm, that's willing to learn and willing to develop their expertise in their career is a huge, huge plus. I actually worked with somebody when I was doing my assistant psychology position who got her job because she was willing to network. She reached out to the organisation that we worked for as assistant psychologists 6 months before she was given the full-time job. And all she said to the CEO, to the managing directors of the company was, I'm willing to give you a day of my week. I'll give you a full day of my week where I'll come and work voluntarily as an assistant psychologist. They immediately said yes and brought her on board in the next couple of weeks after doing a little bit of training. So what had transpired was simply off the back of her networking, she had gained contacts, she had got her name known, she was already in the field working for free for 6 months as an assistant psychologist 1 day a week. And then when the full-time position came up, she of course was the first person in line to get that job. This shows exactly what people need to be doing. They need to be exploiting the gaps, thinking a little bit about networking with organizations and managerial individuals, exploiting those gaps and actually then building experience, and you're able to kind of dominate when those jobs become available. You need to think a little bit about what you need to know and who you need to reach out to in order to network. So it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of research, you sitting in your flat or in your house on your laptop, researching your area, thinking about the people that you want to connect with, and actually putting yourself out there, leveraging your time, saying to them, you know what, I'm a psychology student, but I've got an afternoon a week that I could give you if you're willing to take it, and I can come in and do some work, or I can do some research, or I can even do some filing. Any of these kind of things to get you more exposure with these individuals. There's a couple of things I want to actually cover here in the interview for an assistant psychologist. Now this might deem to be a different video, but I think it's applicable when we're thinking about applying for your first assistant psychology position and getting it. You need to be thinking about the interview. One of the key things you want to focus on is, are you able to work in a multidisciplinary team? This is something that you want to focus on when you're building that foundation of experience. By a multidisciplinary team, I mean, are you able to work in a team environment with other people? So for example, when I worked as an assistant psychologist in a brain injury unit, I was working with counsellors, clinical psychologists, speech and language therapists, nurses, psychiatrists, administrative team staff. So these are the kind of things that you want to build experience with, and you want to get that across in the interview. One of the key things they look for is, can you be a part of a bigger team? Are you a good team member? I think in psychology often we can think it's quite individualized, that I've got to learn the theory and learn the research and learn the different models of psychology. And yes, some of that is important, but ultimately sometimes we can lose the idea that we've got to work in a team sometimes. So build some experience in multidisciplinary teams and get that across in your interview. One of the key things that people want to know is, are you a personable individual? Can you be worked with? Are you enjoyable to be around? That sounds really basic after all the years of study that you've done and all those years of study still to go for becoming a psychologist. Asking, are you an enjoyable person to be around seems a bit basic, but it's something that can be easily overlooked. When I got my job as an assistant psychologist, I was about a year, maybe six, in fact I was about 6 months out from my graduate diploma in psychology. I had limited experience in the field. And on the same day when I entered the lobby of the unit that I would eventually work in for the interview, there was somebody there who told me that she had a PhD in sleep psychology, whatever sleep psychology is, I don't really even know what that is, but she had advanced qualifications from me. A couple of months after me getting the job, I found out that this person really didn't come across well in the interview. Wasn't somebody that could work within that MDT, that multidisciplinary team setting, wasn't somebody that was personable or could be worked with. So that just shows you the power of actually being a nice, enjoyable person to be around can have more power than your qualifications. So you really got to focus on that. The next thing to focus on for your interview is to know your stuff. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to overlook the fact that we need to know our theory and we need to know a little bit of our research. When I had my interview as an assistant psychologist in a brain injury unit, I was asked to name the different lobes of the brain, the different parts of the brain, and discuss what those things did. I had no idea that was coming up, and probably I could have answered that a little bit better had I known or had I thought about that. So you've really got to know your stuff. Know about the line of work that you're going into. Know about the patients that you or the clients that you might be working with and the people that you might be working with. And then develop an understanding of the industry itself and the organization, because you are going to have to know your stuff. If you're going into an adult mental health service, it could be to do with all different kinds of mental health difficulties. You're going to have to know about those mental health difficulties, where they come from, how they can be treated, how that feels for the subjective individual. So don't overlook the fact that you're going to have to know your stuff. Okay guys, thanks so much for watching this week's episode of GetPsyched. This week we've been taking a look at getting your first assistant psychology position. This one is for the psychology students and psychology graduates out there. If you've enjoyed this week's episode of GetPsyched, guys, then you're definitely going to enjoy this video on can mental health difficulties be cured. And if you've been enjoying GetPsyched as a whole, then make sure to subscribe to us. You can hit that little bell next to the subscribe button and you'll get weekly reminders every time I upload. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and hopefully catch you next week.